hi everyone, welcome to this Northern Writers Awards Roadshow. This is the Arvon Foundation and New Writing North Developing Your Novel in Progress Roadshow. Really pleased that you can all be here. I'm going to run through some housekeeping stuff at the start and some general stuff about the awards, and then I'll introduce our brilliant speakers and we can get started. So if people need captions, my colleague Catherine has posted some instructions in the chat, but along the bottom bar of Zoom, if you press the CC live transcript button, you can get the kind of Zoom integrated captions to come up, or also there's some instructions if you want a transcript that opens in a different window from Otter AI. There's some instructions on that chat, but if you have any problems, please do post in the chat because, as I say, my colleagues are there and can help you out with that. So yes, this is Northern Writers Awards Roadshow. So the Northern Writers Awards are the New Writing North run awards for works in progress. So thank you to our funders, Arts Council England, and to our main awards partner, Northumbria University, and of course to one of our partners, the Arvon Foundation, who will be talking about tonight. The awards are free to enter and they support works in progress across a range of different genres. There's awards for prose, for fiction and narrative non-fiction, for middle grade, TV, young adult, poetry. So I would recommend that you go and look on our northernwritersawards.com website, because that'll have all of the specific information about the different awards. We've got FAQs, you can look into all of the eligibility. And we also have a strand of awards for young writers, if you are or know of people who want to apply who are under the age of 18. My colleagues, as I say, in the chat, my colleague Will Mackey will be, if you have any questions that are more logistical, hopefully Will can answer those for you, but then also please do use the Q&A function if you have any questions throughout the event for the speakers, and then in the final kind of 15 minutes of the event I can run through those. So yeah, please do ask any questions if you have them as we go along. And so the awards close at midnight on the 17th of February, Thursday the 17th of February 2022, although I will say that the Channel 4 Writing for TV Awards are remaining open until midnight on Thursday the 17th of March, so you have a bit more time for those ones, but like I say, that information is all on our website. So tonight we'll be talking about mainly the novel, the fiction awards, because like I say, this is in partnership with Arvon, and we have the Arvon Award, which is an award that you can apply to. You can also apply to it as well as one of the main strands of the awards, and so the winner will get a tutored or untutored retreat, depending on what you think will be the most benefit to you, and children's writers and adult writers can apply for that award. And so why don't we start by talking a little bit about the speakers who we have here. So welcome to you all. We have Hellen Meller. So Helen is co-director of Arvon Lumb Bank and Arvon at Home. Helen has an extensive background in publishing, television, festivals and events programming. Between 2012 and 2019, she was artistic director at Hebden Bridge Arts Festival, and she's also vice chair of the Bronte Society. So hi, thanks for being here, Helen. We also have Liz Flanagan. Liz is an award-winning children's and YA author. Her debut novel, Eden Summer, was nominated for the Carnegie Medal, and her second novel, Dragon Daughter, won the Leeds Book Award and the Coldsale Book of the Year. And its sequel, Rise of the Shadow Dragons, was published in May 2020. Liz has taught in a range of settings, including for Arvon, as well as for Newcastle University and the University of Leeds. And this year she is the judge of the Young Adult Award for the Northern Writers Award. So this is part of the Northern debut strand, but we'll be awarding one writer specifically for writing in a genre of young adults. So if that sounds like you, then definitely check that out. And we also have Okechukwu Nzelu. He's a Manchester-based writer. In 2015, he was a recipient of a Northern Writers Award, and his debut novel, The Private Joys of Nana Maloney, won a Betty Trask Award. It was shortlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize and the Polari First Book Prize, and longlisted for the Portico Prize. His second novel, Here Again Now, will be published by Dialogue Books, who are an imprint of Little Brown, in March 2020, so really soon. And then we also have Sarah Dunnakey. So Sarah's debut novel, The Companion, was published by Orion in 2017, having previously won a Northern Writers Award in 2014. And then in 2019, Sarah won the Northern Writers Award, Arvon Award, and she's currently editing her second novel, part of which was written during that retreat in 2020. So welcome to all our speakers. Thank you so much for being there. Yeah, I think I want to start by we'll talk about Arvon. They are the partner of this roadshow. And as I mentioned, the Arvon Award gives the winner access to a tutored or untutored retreat, depending on what you think will be of the most benefit to you. So Helen, welcome Helen. I was wondering perhaps if you could talk a little bit about Arvon for anyone who is unfamiliar with them, about the kind of background and what you guys do and what the winning writer could expect for this award.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Grace. Yeah, we're delighted to be developing our partnership with New Writing North. I think we're coming up for about 10 years now. We've been offering the Arvon Award, which, as Grace says, allows a writer to select a tutored or an untutored retreat at one of our 3 writing houses, one in Devon, one in Shropshire, and one in Yorkshire in Lumb, where in fact we had hoped to do tonight's roadshow from. So yeah, it's a brilliant opportunity, as I'm sure our writers gathered alongside me will testify, that Arvon is the UK's leading creative writing charity. And we've been providing the time and space for adults and young people to privilege their imagination and give themselves some time. That might be time to start throwing ideas around. It might be time to start editing, just basically providing, a really lovely place and space for people to, to further those writing ends. So we're absolutely delighted that here in 2022, we're offering, hopefully, someone an unfettered opportunity to travel to a destination of their choice. I think Sarah managed to just get her retreat in at the Hurst literally before we closed down. I think you said earlier, Sarah, that the hand sanitizers had just started appearing, but you managed to get in there, and we're looking forward to seeing the fruits of that retreat in due course. So yeah, absolutely delighted to be part of this magical process. And, developing Northern voices is really, really germane, particularly to us at Lumb. We have got great plans to redevelop Lumb as very much a beacon for Northern writing and Northern voices, and working with New Writing North to amplify that amazing sound that we generate so beautifully here in the North.
Oh, thank you, Helen. And yes, so as we said, Sarah, you won the Arvon Award in 2019. And as Helen mentioned, thankfully, by the skin of your teeth, managed to go on a retreat before everything shut down in 2020. So I wondered if you could talk maybe firstly about what the appeal was, why you chose to apply to the Arvon Award, and then, how was it? Like, how was your retreat? What was that experience like for you?
Okay. I always knew about Arvon. I live in Hebden Bridge, so Lumb was always this heavenly place up the hill. But I never felt that I could, and it's weird, but justify taking a week off to go there. And I always wanted to do it. Many years ago, I'm trying to remember, I think it might be about 2008, I won a short story competition and I won a week at Arvon on a tutored retreat. And it was life-changing in terms of my writing. It really was. It made me feel like a writer at the end of it. I felt as though I could do it. I submitted work for some of my early submissions, got a story on Radio 4 from that week. And it was something I always wanted to return to. And again, it's finding the time when you're working full time. I had a small child. And then when I saw there was an Arvon Award, I thought, well, if I won it, then I'd have to go. So I'd have to find the time, wouldn't I? So I entered it in 2019 with a work in progress that was starting to shape up already, really. By the time I got around to taking the award, because of work, trying to find the time to fit it in, I'd actually already got that novel out on submission. So instead of taking that week to edit the novel, which had been my first thought, a whole week away to edit, I decided to do an untutored retreat at the Clock House, the Hurst in Shropshire, and start something new and give myself the space to sit and just get words down, uncritical writing. And I literally did that for 5 days. I sat in this beautiful room with amazing views and I just wrote. And I went for a run at lunchtime sometimes and just wrote and wrote. And I didn't think about whether it was any good or not. I just got the words down on the paper. And it was really freeing to have that. So it's there for the 5 days. And the way the Hurst works, 4 different study rooms, and we all kept to ourselves until tea time, 7 o'clock every evening. We met in the kitchen and had a chat, the 4 of us, all working on very different things, different life experiences, and then went back to our rooms and did the same thing the next day. And it was really productive. And coming out of there and the world changing, it has, you know, become an even more special time in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you picked up on. I think a lot of writers and previous winners say that it's almost like giving yourself the permission to create time to do that, because it's so easy to say, oh, you know, well, why am I doing this? It's just, you know, it's too indulgent or whatever. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that people who do win the awards often kind of bring up, that they got that permission. So I think that's really interesting. Liz, hi. So I also wanted to bring you into the Arvon discussion, because as I mentioned, you actually teach from the other side, or have taught on an Arvon course. So I was just wondering, you know, from your experience from the other side, what do you think the benefits are, or how, yeah, what have you kind of experienced from that?
Yeah, sure. So for me, Arvon's been there all my writing life, right from the very beginning, because when I was 17, I went on a schools course, and then I worked at Lumb for a while, and now I teach courses. And just as you've been saying, it's time and space to write, but it's also kind of an instant, small, tight-knit community, all the people on your course with you, if you're in an open course. And it's getting feedback, sometimes for the first time, you know, to hear that this idea is working, you know, that there's something in what you're doing, that somebody else gets it, and to be sharing work amongst the group, and to hear what other people are doing, to have a chance to ask questions and to share experience within the group. I mean, it really is life-changing, I think, having been on several Arvon courses as well. And I still remember like key questions that the tutor asked me at the time, you know, what is the story question for this work? And it's like a light bulb going on. And so to have all those things, I think time and questions and people inviting you to try new things and being one in a group like that, establishing trust, and then hopefully powering you on when you go back to your own life, and it's just you with your desk again, or you and your laptop, you and your notebook on the bus, whatever you're doing, that you can tap back into that week and that experience, and hopefully that will keep you going a little bit.
Oh, thank you. That's really valuable to hear, I think, from you guys who've been there and done it. And then Okechukwu, hi. So you won a Northern Writers Award in 2015, and so I just wanted to ask. It wasn't, it was a Northern Writers Award for fiction, so not specifically Arvon, but I just wanted to ask you, I guess, about what had your writing journey been up to that point, and then how did winning the award kind of change things for you, if they did?
Hi, thanks for having me. And my writing journey up until 2015, when I won that award, I think I really, what you said, Sarah, really resonated with me about that sort of permission that I think that this kind of recognition gives you. I had been writing all my life, and I'd always loved writing, and I'd had sort of a very early draft of a novel that I was sort of ready to send out to agents, and I think I was sort of sending it out to maybe a handful, maybe 5 or 6, and when I won the award, it was sort of this wonderful sort of moment of permission in my life, and also it just kicked off this wonderful chain of events. So I was just so encouraged by this. What you said, Sarah, really resonated with me, because I think that when you get this kind of recognition and this kind of pat on the back from this wonderful organization, it sort of tells you actually it's okay to keep spending time on this and to keep dedicating time to this. So, somebody who is not related to you by blood believes in you and really wants to encourage you. And in fact, one of the wonderful things about the award that I won was that New Writing North really championed my work in a very, very impactful way. They sent my manuscript to the people who became my agent and my publisher. And so after kind of a few years of sort of writing and plugging away at this thing, and I'd had a few rejections from agents, and suddenly this all sort of happened overnight, and I've just had the most wonderful time of things since then. And in fact, I'm looking forward to teaching at Lumb in April, so there's that to look forward to as well.
we're all so connected with the
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. And I guess similar question to you, Sarah. You know, you also won the Northern Writers Award before you won the Arvon one for fiction. And yeah, I guess kind of the same thing that I asked Oki, what had your writing journey been before that? And then kind of what happened between winning the award and the companions being published? You know, how did the award affect that, I guess?
I mean, one of the ways the award affected was, and I remember coming along when you're nominated, when you win one of the awards, all getting together in Newcastle to chat about preparing a pitch. Part of the prize, as well as, you know, the financial prize and everything, was a workshop and preparing a pitch on how to sell your novel. It was the first time I'd ever talked about my novel to anyone, other than I did very fortunately have an agent at that point, but I hadn't even told my family what it was about. I mean, I just keep my writing so secret, it's ridiculous. And it was just that, you know, tell us about your novel and what it's about. And again, that sort of permission thing that, well, somebody had liked it, so therefore I could say what it was about, and maybe people wouldn't laugh. So up till then, I'd already got an agent. I sort of had a bit of a lucky break in. I went to writing lessons led by Stephen May, who also has a long time connection with Arvon. He was a director there, wasn't he? Yeah. So I went to his writing lessons, and then he went to some awards in London, met with an agent called Lucy Luck, mentioned that a couple of his students had writing that he thought she might be interested in. I got a phone call from her, and she said, send me what you've got. And at that point, I didn't have a novel to send her. I had an idea and the beginnings of something. So I took a chance and sent her that and admitted that I didn't have the rest of it. And she said, okay, when will you have it finished by? And this was February. I said, July. And as you were saying earlier on, Oki, about deadlines, I had from February to July to finish this novel. And I did what you shouldn't do. I sent her a first draft. But it sort of developed from there. And by the time the awards came around, that was just another boost, really. In fact, no, it was the same year. That was it. I got Lucy in February. I'd already entered the awards. I won the award. And so I already had the agent. However, when she was pitching to editors, you know, it really helped that I had this award. I'd been to the pitching event that was also part of the prize with, and I got a publishing contract. I think it was the following April, you know, and it just feel like it was all part of that journey to that. Yeah. Thank you.
And Liz, as you know, a fellow writer, I'm going to have to ask you the same question just about, I guess, your publishing journey. You know, how did you start out? I know a lot of people in the audience are really interested in that process of, you know, how do you start? You write something, how do you get that agent? I think sometimes, not intentionally, but it's a bit of a mystifying world with the publishing process. And I think, yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear from you about what your journey was, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So when I was growing up, I didn't know any authors, and I didn't know anyone who worked in the industry. So it was when I went to Lumb, and one of the tutors was Burley Doherty, and she showed us her unfinished manuscript for Dear Nobody, which tells you how long ago it was. And I thought that was amazing that she was asking these teenagers for a response on her unfinished book, and I was really excited. I'd never thought that a book, you know, hung around being unfinished for a while. And then in my 20s, I kind of forgot that I loved writing, and I left it until I was on maternity leave, and then I was out of the 9 to 5 and I started writing again. And it took me a long time, probably took me about 10 years and several failed projects. But during that time, I was working at Lumb. And, you know, when you work there, you're making the lunch and you're doing lots of things, and you're hearing all these conversations about writing. And you learn almost by osmosis, just being there. So I learned, you know, I heard conversations about getting an agent, and I read more. And I gained confidence, I think, just hanging out with writers. And I think it was about, it was my third novel that things changed. And I think I chucked everything at it. I thought, oh, this might be my last shot, so I'm really going to go for it. And that's not true, by the way. There's nobody out there who decides how many shots you get apart from you. And if you have some rejections, doesn't have any impact on later success. It doesn't have to mean anything if you keep going and keep believing. So although I had an agent for a while, it was a few novels in, and then I got published with Eden Summer, which was my first YA novel. And at that point I was doing a PhD, which I got like a scholarship for. And that gave me the time and the space to write, and also gave me critical feedback as well. And I think all those things are important. Having, you know, somebody who's saying, yeah, keep going, you know, keep sending me pages. And it doesn't always have to be a formal setup. I know lots of writers who do that informally for each other. And also, even then, once you are published, I don't mind talking about rejections that happen even after you've been published. So, you know, when you ask what we're doing a bit later on, maybe I'll bring that in as well, that there's lots of ups and downs along the way, even after your debut novel.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of good advice for people to know. And kind of coming back to that rejection thing, one of the questions actually that we got tonight, which I was like, well, I'll just answer that because it's not really panel specific, it's logistical. And it was, you know, if I've applied before to the Northern Writers Awards and not been successful, will that impact another submission? And so just to be very, very clear, absolutely not. The awards are judged blind every year. So we wouldn't even know that you'd applied before, but also there's been plenty of Northern Writers Awards previous winners who've applied for multiple years with the same manuscript or with different things before winning. And I think, yeah, just definitely, if that was you who asked that question, please don't be put off by that at all. That's really not how it's set up. And also just remember that with every year you get different judges, and there is an element to judging which is subjective, and it might just be that this year is the year that your work really connects with someone. So yes, please don't take it as a bad thing if you have entered before and not got it. That definitely shouldn't put you off. But yeah, also that was interesting what you were saying, Liz, about that kind of even if it's not in a formal setup, but getting that kind of that feedback. And I wanted to ask Helen about some of the other kind of things that Arvon are offering at the minute. So I know all of the Northern Writers Awards winners are going to get an Arvon masterclass this year, but also, you know, that is something that Arvon make available, and you now have Arvon at home. And I was just wondering if you could talk about the other kind of opportunities that writers who are in a position to might be interested in exploring to get support from Arvon.
Yeah, absolutely. We launched Avon at Home in April 2020, not really because of COVID, but COVID just propelled the idea forward faster. But what we realized was that actually, okay, right now it was fulfilling a need because no one could go anywhere, but actually there were loads of writers out there who wanted to engage with their practice in a more flexible way that suited their lifestyle, their caring responsibilities, their neurodiversity, their resources. And suddenly we had this really flexible opportunity where people could write on their terms. So we have weekend courses, we have day-long courses, we have 5-day courses that mirror the residential model. And we're about to launch a 5-weeker because again, as people are going back to work, they're looking at really flexible ways of engaging with their practice. But our masterclasses are probably the most popular thing on the menu at the moment, because people are coming week on week. They're looking for something, a bit like the deadlines that our lovely writers have been talking about, a reason, some permission to have just a 2-hour slot where they can really stretch those writing muscles. So hopefully Arvon really does have something to offer every writer at any stage in their writing journey.
Absolutely. And what's the website if people do want to check it out? I mean, maybe one of my colleagues could put it in the chat for people, but
that would be great, Grace. It's www.arvon.org, and we're about a week and a half away from launching our summer program. So it would be great if people did sign up to the mailing list and get first dibs on what I think is an amazing crop of courses, masterclasses and readings coming up.
Yes, definitely do go and check that out. So some of the other questions that we got were particularly around kind of craft, I would say, of writing, and at that position when, you know, these are awards for work in progress, when you are in progress and you're trying to do that first draft or maybe second draft. And so someone had asked how you writers kind of personally approach your process. Someone was interested to know if you outline beforehand, whether you just kind of run with an idea and let it change as you go. So maybe Oki, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think every writer probably works quite differently. There are some writers who I know will plan in quite a lot of meticulous detail at first and then go from there. And some writers, you know, who feel that they just want to get on with the writing and just have something on the page. For me, I think I'm somewhere in between the two. So I like to have a lot of notes. I carry a notebook with me a lot of the time, but I also use my phone. So I have the sort of Google Keep I use because I know I can access it on my phone or my laptop or whatever I'm using. And wherever I am, I can access it. So whenever I have an idea, I just jot it down. And then periodically, I will look at these notes and sort of try and coalesce them into something not necessarily terribly formal, but something more coherent that looks a bit more like a plan, so that I have a sense of where the story is going. I like to keep things quite informal because the more I like to have a lot of notes, but if I keep things quite informal, it makes me feel as though the ideas are still subject to change and not fixed. And I think that's really important for me because things do change in the early stages. Things change all the way along until you sort of agree with your publisher that that's it and that there's no more changes happening. And I think it's important for me to feel that that's okay. And I think for me personally, if I feel that I've formalize things too much and kind of constrict that. But I do like to also have quite a lot of different types of planning. So I like to have a note, I like to have notes or bullet point notes. I like to use a table so I can sort of figure out, even before I necessarily know exactly what's happening in the plot, it'll help me to decide that if I've got sometimes even an Excel spreadsheet saying, how does this character feel about wiping his shoes before he comes into the house? How does this character feel about doing the washing up? How does this character feel about her parents? Like all those sort of details, if I can have them across characters, really help me to think, okay, well, given the dynamics that I've got here and the sort of the raw materials of these characters, that's where this is going. And I just allow myself the freedom to depart from that entirely. I do come up with a lot of notes and I'm planning the outline of a storyline, but I sort of just say to myself, it's completely okay if that changes, and that will change all the time, and that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. Because like you say, I guess everyone's answer to that would be different, which is encouraging, I think, to whoever asked this, because there's clearly no right way of doing it. How about you, Sarah? How do you approach that?
That really resonated, Oki. I was just thinking today that I write in pencil a lot, and it's about that. I don't even mark it down in pen. So I'm writing it in pencil because then it could always be rubbed out. But I do when I first did try to write a longer piece of fiction many years ago after my first Arvon retreat, I spent ages trying to get that first chapter right. You hear about it's got to, got to catch the first line's got to be important, the first chapter. But I spent so long on that first chapter, and then I eventually got away from the first chapter and moved on. By the time I'd finished that draft, I went back to the first chapter and thought, I don't need that, and started on something like the fifth chapter. And it made me realise that actually getting the story down was, for me, certainly with the way I write, was going to be more important. And I do now try to do a lot of uncritical writing, either with pen and paper or pencil and paper or typing, just getting the story out, the ideas out, and without editing, and only going back and editing it after I've got quite a lot down. And my typing is so bad that I'm either, if I've written it in pen or pencil, I do have to write it up, obviously. If I've typed it down, when I look back at it, there's not a word spelt right. So my very first edit is actually reading through and making it actually into proper words. And that's the only edit I do until my first draft is finished. So at the moment, I am editing the one that I started at the Hearst. And my first look at it is a very much a structural edit. So I'll go through all the words I've got and start to get a shape of the novel. I'm very reliant on postcards and on post-it notes to try and shift things around. So, nothing is permanent. That isn't necessarily the first chapter. That's trying to shape it. And then once I've got the shape, then I can go back in and start being a bit more critical about the actual line by line and the characters. I also write a lot that I'm never going to use. So I've got the novel at the moment, it's got an event happens and all the characters do something leading up to that event. And I've written out exactly what happens. I've written the storyline of what they were all doing leading up to that event. There is only one narrator, so we're not going to get that full backstory, but it's all there. So I know why that character does that and how they like to react. And I just find that another person who's connected with Arvon, actually Rachel Connor, did talk to me years ago about the iceberg, that you've got all this stuff written and then your novel is the bit on the top that pokes out of the sea. And I really get that now, that there's a lot of information, a lot of writing that doesn't make the final draft, but it's really crucial.
That's so interesting. I think that, I'm sure a lot of people find that really helpful. I've heard other people, I think Sarah Collins was talking about when she wrote the Confessions of Riley Langston, and she said the same. She wrote reams and reams of what happened that she knew wasn't going to go into the book, but just to make those characters feel as real as possible. So yeah, that's really interesting. How about you, Liz? What are you going to go completely different and say you don't have any idea what's going to happen? You just pick it up and it comes out perfectly?
No, I'm such a planner. But one thing that really changed for me with the third novel, I tried this challenge, which you can join anytime, and that's the 100 days of writing. And just like Okechukwu and Sarah have been saying, there's something about letting yourself do that provisional stage. And with 100 days of writing, all you do is say you're going to turn up to your project every day for 100 days. And for a lot of people, that's really tricky when you've got day jobs and families and all sorts going on. And for me, it let me push forwards and not look at what I'd done. So I did have a plan, but because I was writing every single day and I was determined to get a first draft done in 100 days, it let me do a really rough first draft and to live with it being really rough and really unfinished, and just to get that momentum going. And it's something I've tried to keep up with. I usually write longhand. My writing is appalling. Nobody else could read it. And then when I've got a scene or a chapter, I type it up, and that's a bit like my first edit, because there is something about seeing the words on the screen. It starts to feel a bit more solid and a bit more finished, even though it isn't, even though you still want to mess with it. So the handwriting part is quite important for me, but I do usually know some of the beats along the way, and I usually know the end, although not always. It's really nice to not over plan and leave some surprises along the way, and that's when you know that if it's surprising you and there's something exciting that you didn't see coming, for me that's a sign that I'm on the right path. It's like having a map but then doing the journey, and that's a different thing.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's such a lovely way to describe it. And I do think, like you say, it's so interesting that everyone's so different. The writer Anne Cleves, who writes crime novels, she doesn't plan it at all, which blows my mind. She said that would be boring for her if she knew who done it when she started the novel. So she writes the novel to solve the mystery. And I'm like, my mind is blown. But yeah, it's just really interesting. There's so many different ways to approach it. And another kind of more on the craft side question, someone had asked, like, and it's probably a difficult question, but like, how do you keep that motivation up, especially maybe when you're on the first draft, or when you have had some rejections, or if it just feels overwhelming to get your first draft out? Like, don't know if any of you have any tips. Maybe come back to you, Liz, just while you've been speaking. Do you have any tips on how to stay motivated?
I think take lots of breaks and work in really short bursts. And if you've got anybody that can hold you accountable, whether it's a friend or a family member, or there's some really brilliant communities online where you can turn up and write together. So all those things, and even just setting a really modest time limit every day. So if you've got 5 minutes a day, just do your 5 minutes. If you've got 20 minutes, do 20 minutes. You can write a whole draft that way. And I noticed that somebody's put in the notes that they missed the thing about the 100 days, but if you use the hashtag 100 days and have a look at that, the writer Jen Ashworth has written a lot about the 100 days challenge. It's really informal, but if you just Google 100 days of writing, it should pop up with some really nice examples for you.
Thank you. And Sarah, how about you? Do you have anything to add on kind of keeping motivated?
Well, funnily enough, I also did the 100 days thing. I did a Facebook thing, and it was actually 100K in 100 days. And the idea was that you write 1,000 words a day for 100 days, which is hard if you're working and got a thing. But it really worked, because it was that actually 1,000 words is sort of doable. They don't have to be good words. They just have to get them down. And it freed me up in exactly the same way that Liz. And I felt I did need it. And one thing Liz did briefly touch on, the whole rejection thing. So in between the novel, The Companion, and the one I'm writing, I did write a whole other novel, got it very edited and submitted it, and got very close to having it published. But in the end, it hasn't been published, and I have had to shelve it. And it is hard sort of getting back on it after that, especially if you put everything in. I love that novel, I still love it, but it possibly is never going to be published. And then how do you think, okay, start again? And it is hard. And you've just got to go, what I did was, I love this other idea I've had that I was working on at the Hurst. I'm going to go for it and keep going on that. But it is hard. The self-belief is knocked by rejection. You can't help that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's a great answer to that. And how about you, Oki? What would you say on the topic of staying motivated?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we've heard so far, I really, really agree with. And I think it's absolutely true that rejection can just be very, very difficult. And I think that for me, you can't pretend that it doesn't hurt your feelings, because that kind of just stymies the process of kind of grieving the rejection and then moving on, and both of which are really important. So for me, I just need to take a moment, wallow a bit, accept that it's not very nice to be rejected, and then just breathe and carry on going. One thing that a friend who actually works in sort of music, who's a singer, recommended to me is if you are at that stage where you're sending out your manuscripts to agents and publishers, and maybe you're getting some rejections, what can be really helpful is to put away a very small amount of money each time you get rejected. So maybe 50p, and then every time you get a rejection, that kind of builds up. And so after you get to like 10, you maybe buy yourself just a small little nice treat to sort of reward yourself for being so resilient. And I think that's really important, to just be kind to yourself in all sorts of stages of the process. Going back to what we were talking about in terms of just getting the manuscript done, one of the things I find is just trying to build in something pleasurable as part of the process of writing, because I think it is important to write every day. And if you are doing that, sometimes it can, especially towards the beginning, it can feel kind of like a grueling process. It's a very difficult thing to get started and think, oh my God, this isn't very good, and what am I doing? And how am I going to carry on doing this for ages and ages? And actually, if you just sort of try and build in nice parts of the process, so that means just that, for me, what I was doing definitely over the summer when I was working as a teacher and had those quite long vacation breaks, it meant that I had a bit more time to write then and very little during the year. But when I was writing in the summer, I would try and cycle to a cafe somewhere away from where I live and just give myself kind of that nice experience of just a nice bit of time to think, or I'd go on a long walk before I write and listen to an audiobook that I really like, and just take that time to myself. And I just found that really valuable. And it might be something like, I don't know, having a cream egg every Sunday when you're writing, or whatever it is that helps you feel like you're being kind to yourself, just to treat yourself with a bit of compassion as you sort of do this really very difficult thing.
I think that's such valuable advice, like say, to remember to kind of, keep it where you can, be kind to yourself and make it an enjoyable experience. We had a question that I found interesting. I wondered, Helen, if you had thoughts on this as someone who, has a lot of experience in publishing, in working with writers, at Lumb. Someone said, can you ever be too young to write a book? And I thought that was interesting, as often you hear people saying, am I too old? Or being too young, do you think there really is a right time, or do you think that actually, no?
Absolutely not. I mean, we welcome quite young groups of children to Lumb, and obviously right to the opposite end of the spectrum, plenty of octogenarians come through Avon at Home and Lumb and the rest of the organisation. I think your time is your time. Some people don't want to get published. Some people just love the act of writing, whether it's their family story or whether they're angry and they're channeling through poetry. Others, have a story to tell, and there is a time. And it's got nothing to do with age, but a lot to do with privilege and permission and just having that little bit of time. And I love the idea of Oki going out on his bike ride and then sitting down to write. I think that's really important. Even if you're time poor, just a tiny little change of scene, a little altered perspective, and who knows what it might, unleash.
Yeah, thank you for that. Liz, I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically kind of the genre that you write in, because a question that we had was, they felt that genre novels or, YA novels are kind of overlooked sometimes within competitions or just within the literary scene, and maybe that is kind of putting them off from putting their work out there. But I just wondered if, as a kind of, young adult novelist, you had any thoughts on that?
Sure. And certainly in the past, when I've entered a children's or a young adult book in the general fiction category, and I can see that the judges don't write young adult or genre fiction, and so I did have that feeling myself once or twice in the past, but this is not the case with the New Writing North, because there is somebody who writes young adult fiction and reads a lot of young adult fiction, who'll be looking at your work. And I think it is really important that you feel your work is being read and judged in context by somebody who knows the conventions of it, because I think every age category and every genre does have its particular conventions or language that works really well for that particular age group. So you want somebody who works in that bracket to read your work, and that's completely understandable. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I hope I've answered it for you.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to switch to some questions that are coming in now, because absolutely loads of them are coming in. So some of these are towards a specific person, but otherwise I kind of can just leave them up to if anyone has anything to say. So someone said, you've all talked about the rawness of early drafts, and if they're submitting works in progress, please, any tips on how raw is too raw is something that someone's asked. I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well,
okay,
I would say the stuff that I type in is too raw, because nobody would understand a word of it. But as I said, I did send, when Lucy, my agent, did ask for it, it was a first draft, and that's not recommended to send to an agent. But I do think if something like these awards, it is a work in progress, and if you polish your 10,000 words or whatever, but it is a work in progress, and it may well change completely by the time you finish the novel. But I do think there's a point where you think I could share this with someone. It does make sense as read it out loud. I found that's really useful. If you read it out loud, you will spot any really clumsy, clunky bits that don't work, and that can be a way of getting a draft that is a good work in progress.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's really important to read work out loud. I think it's I tell my students to do that all the time. It's a really important part of the editing process, and I think definitely for the first draft, it can never really be too raw. I think that you need, often the point of a first draft is just to make you feel like you could do it. So really you just need to get it done and not worry about how good it is. There's no such thing as a first draft that's not good enough, because it doesn't have to be any good. And I think that novels are kind of like people, in that they need safe childhoods to go on and be functioning adults. So what I did with my first draft was I just told myself, no one's ever going to see this. It's completely okay. You can experiment. You can change your mind halfway through. You can try different types of perspective. You can do all sorts of stuff that you will definitely not be doing when you come to show your agent or your publisher. And that really helped me, because it made me feel, it sort of took a lot of the pressure off, and I could just try stuff, and it was completely fine for it to be very, very raw, because I knew that later down the road I was going to edit it and do absolutely everything I could do to make it the best I possibly could.
Thank you. Someone, I guess this would be for Liz, someone has asked, I'm writing a middle grade here it is. How can you tell who your target reader is? I'm writing what could be a children's book, because it's about children, but it also has quite adult themes. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that, Liz.
Yeah, I could talk about this all day, actually, so I'll try and be brief. So I guess you need to ask yourself, do you want it to be a story that adults will enjoy? And actually there's a child character, and often that happens in literary fiction or different genre fiction. Or is it really from that child's perspective as they're discovering things for the first time? There's also quite a useful convention that in middle grade fiction you might find the main character, if they're, say, 11, it's often aimed at a 9-year-old reader. Maybe the reader is a year or two younger. And there can be some really dark themes in children's literature, but it's done in that age-appropriate way that feels right for the reader of that, 10, 11 or whatever age. In young adult fiction, obviously you're dealing with teenagers, and it can be much more sophisticated and much darker, but you're still keeping that teenager in mind, and you're making it, dwell on their experience and their concerns and their language and all of those things. So I guess it's up to you whether you feel it's going to have more appeal the child or to the adult reader who's kind of remembering childhood. And you're the person that knows your story best, so you're the one who'll have the answers there, I think. I hope that's still helpful for you. And again, there's loads of stuff online if you want to have a look and Google that kind of question. There's some fantastic resources out there.
Thank you. Someone's asked, I'm in the process of editing my first general fiction manuscript and want to send it to an editor. Do you have any advice of the best starting point? I feel quite overwhelmed on where to start. So I'm not sure if, you know, would you recommend this? Is this something you've done? Or even, you know, Helen, I know you've done kind of editing for other people and maybe what that process is like, or if you think you don't need to get an external editor. I don't know, what would anyone's thoughts be on that?
Sorry, can I just check, is this asking a question about whether when they say an editor, do they mean somebody like the literary consultancy, or do they mean like an editor of a publishing house?
I think they mean not a published, like, I don't think they have a publishing deal. I think, you know, maybe more like TLC, like you're saying about sending it to an external person before they're submitting it to something, but please do.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I haven't got any sort of direct experience with the TLC in terms of, I've worked with them, but I've never had sort of that kind of feedback from them. But I know of people who found it really tremendously helpful to have that kind of feedback, partly because, especially if you're getting feedback from somebody who has the kind of inside knowledge of the industry, that maybe you wouldn't want to get from directly submitting to a publisher. I know of people for whom that can be really helpful. I also think, I guess one thing to bear in mind, I know for myself, I never ever want to show my work to anybody until I know that I've made it as good as I possibly can myself, partly because it's always a bit more disappointing if you get negative feedback that you already had anticipated in your mind, and also because if you are, especially if you're paying for a service, you know, however good the value for money is, it's always going to be better if they're telling you stuff that you don't already know. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Thank you. Someone has said, you know, have you abandoned a writing project and how do you know when to let go and start on something new? Which, Sarah, you mentioned, you know, that you did that, and how, I guess, yeah, how did you know when you were at that point, and how did it feel to do that?
It is really hard. I mean, the first novel I ever did write was a long, long time ago after my first Arvon, and I was obsessed with the idea of it and convinced it was the best idea anyone had ever had for a novel. And I worked on it and worked on it, and it was really, it was an adult novel, and at one point I turned it into a young adult novel because I thought, I've got to make this work. I did try a couple of different genres, and it was so hard to put it away and start on something new. And I think it was only because this agent did ring me up and say, can you send me something? And I realized, looking back at this, that I couldn't send her that, and I had to start something new, because I looked at her list of authors and knew that this thing I'd been working on for 5 years just wasn't her genre, whereas this other idea I'd had, which became The Companion, possibly was. And it really did take that for me, because this other one that I've abandoned now, my 1920s policewoman novel, I've shelved it, it's there, but at the back of my mind I'm thinking, I've had some incredibly good feedback, you know, editors from publishing houses saying, if only it was a bit more this, if there was only a bit more that. And I'm not at a stage now where I can take that on, because I'm thinking it is what it is, but it could be that I could go back to it and take some of that on board and maybe do it from a different person's narrative viewpoint. So who knows? But it's just hard putting something aside and starting something new.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure that's really helpful to that person. Someone's asked, Liz, mentioned something you said before about a specific question someone asked you about what was the story maybe on the course. Someone said, can this be expanded on? It sounded like some way of asking yourself what the story is truly about.
Yes, it was the wonderful Arvon tutor, Steve Vogue, and he read my first manuscript, and he said to me, what is the story question? And that just blew my mind, because I didn't know at the time. And it's just a helpful thing to ask yourself, you know, if you're trying to summarize your story or your character's journey in one line, can you do it? So hopefully that's a helpful thing to ask yourself. And the wonderful thing about an Arvon course is that, as well as the morning workshops, you get these short tutorials in the afternoon where you get some one-to-one time where the tutor has read your work and you know, they can tell you things they've noticed and they can ask you questions about it. And that was the question for me that made me realise I needed to go back to scratch on that first novel, because I didn't know what the story question was.
Thank you. Yeah, so please do keep sending your questions, and everyone, we've got, you know, just under 10 minutes left. Someone's asked, any tips on how to recover when you've lost sight of one or more of your characters? Which I thought was quite interesting. I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts of this, or just about maybe more generally like how that process of characterization and any reflections that anyone has on that.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. What I like to do, a lot of what you mentioned earlier that Sarah Collins did, that idea of writing a lot of stuff that will never necessarily make it into the final manuscript. I like to do lots of different sketches. So if I call them sketches because I think of the sort of, if you think of like a very big, like impressive painting, like Maddox Ford's work, where you've got loads and loads of stuff going on, a lot of the time artists will do sketches of sort of individual bits of that, so they can see how someone's going to hold their wrist, or how they can see how somebody's going to stand, and that may or may not make it exactly into the final sort of version of it. And I think that's a really sort of handy metaphor to use for writing, is that sometimes I'll see, okay, what would happen if these two characters who never meet in the real novel just met in a supermarket? And that kind of sometimes gives it a bit more energy to the process, I find. And yeah, just give yourself permission to write stuff that only you will see, that only is just for the process of writing. I found that really helpful.
Thank you. And did I see on Twitter, Oki, that you kind of created a playlist for when you were writing the book that kind of helped it? I really like that idea of, I guess, like getting you in the headspace of that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. There were sort of a couple of songs that I put in the novel, and so a couple of songs that I would literally just listen to when I was just walking around and thinking about these characters, and I found that really helpful. Sometimes I think the best advice I can give to a writer is just to be obsessed with your story, and to find a story that you can be obsessed with, because I found I was just always thinking about it, and because of the just sheer amount of time I spent thinking about this story, just as it was a numbers game, there was always going to be a decent amount of ideas coming from there.
Thank you. Someone's asked, do you ever think about word count, or does it tend to naturally fill to make the length of a novel? And I'm not sure, maybe if this is a bit different with adult than in child, like more young adult, Liz, am I right in thinking you have a kind of stricter idea on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always a range for every age bracket. And you can look those up actually. A few different agents have put some typical lengths, but yeah, I think it's much more common when you're writing middle grade or young adult fiction to have a rough sense. And obviously it depends on your drafting process. My first drafts are usually quite a bit shorter than the final one, and some people do the opposite, and they write really long drafts that need to be cut down. So I guess it's just finding your process, and obviously the age of the reader is going to really depend on the length that they can manage. At the moment I'm writing lower middle grade, and it has to be no longer than 20,000 words, so that's a real discipline for me, because that's much shorter than I'm used to.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah? Is that something you kind of consciously think of, or does it just evolve more naturally?
No, I'm an overwriter. So the companion was 144,000 words when I finished the first draft, and published it was 92,000. So, but again, it is often because I've written a lot of back stuff and a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in there, but I've written it for character development. And I really enjoy the editing process. I noticed actually somebody in the chat said about losing characters. I love killing off characters, because they're not necessary. And it's sometimes you read it and think, why did I have this character or three characters? They're not needed, they're not adding to the story, they're a bit two-dimensional. And I really enjoy that part. I did kill off a child once, which I did feel bad about, but the childcare was just taking up too much time, so I just got rid of them. And it's part of the editing process, and you just develop your story as you do it, and it doesn't always, but it can. Then it just starts, the shape comes through, and you
Thank you.
I do it that way.
Thank you. Someone said, would you recommend finding a literary agent or cold calling publishers with your manuscript? Obviously we've heard that you all three do have agents, so I imagine you might say you would recommend that. I mean, just as general kind of industry knowledge, there are fewer publishers who would accept a cold call submission anyway without an and without an agent. A lot of, especially the bigger publishers, it just does come through an agent. And someone's asked, how do you find your agent? So maybe you could just speak a little bit each about, I guess, like that relationship that you have with your agent and why it's so important to get the right agent and what they can kind of do for you. Or maybe you'll disagree and say, you know, actually you don't need one, but I think that'll be interesting. Maybe Oki, can we start with you?
Yeah, so I think, again, everybody's relationship with their agent is going to be slightly different, but I think there are, I mean, for one thing, part of my contract with my publisher, and I think this is probably quite standard, is that I need to have an agent. And I think that's because the agents performs a certain quite basic and important functions for you, sort of negotiating your contracts. And my agent negotiated my contract with my publisher, Dialogue Books, and they just help you navigate the industry in terms of, you know, what is a decent amount to be paid and what fair expectations are, and sort of championing you in terms of sort of exploiting the rights of your book and hopefully sort of helping you make a bit more money. So I think agents do some very practical, really important functions, but also then there's the fact of what you mentioned. I think the word relationship, I think, is really key there, Grace. I think you're absolutely right. And you know, my agent is an advisor as well. Like I talk to her about which ideas to go for. So because she knows me and she knows my work and she's on my side, that's a really valuable person in your career. And the novel that I'm working on now, my third one, I had a chat with her about sort of a couple of ideas I was thinking about, and then out of that discussion came quite a firm decision to go with one and not the other. And I think that an agent is obviously particularly important in as you're starting off, because you need somebody to introduce you to a publisher and to get you into that door. But also, I think throughout your career, I imagine it's a really, really important thing.
Yeah, thank you. Would Sarah and Liz, would you agree with that? Or
yeah, I actually don't have an agent at the moment. I felt incredibly lucky when I got my agent, and I think, like a lot of writers, I've got an agent. It was the big moment. I didn't, because it was through, you know, somebody had recommended me, and that I didn't do any looking around to see if she was the right agent for me. And she was fantastic getting me a publishing deal for The Companion. But as I started to write my second novel, The 1920s Policewoman, it did become increasingly clear that we weren't on the same page in terms of necessarily who she was familiar with in the publishing industry. All the agents have their editors that they know really well and that they can pitch stuff to. And she absolutely loved the novel, but she didn't know the right, as she said herself, she wasn't confident of the right people to pitch it to. It was so different from everything else that was on her books. So we did part ways. And since then, I've been looking for the next novel, finding an agent. And whenever I do the searching, everything, it's interesting. She never comes up as someone who I would normally pitch to as an agent. For my kind of writing, I think my kind of novel, there are lots of agents that I'm going to submit to. But because, you know, she wouldn't actually have been a first choice. She was brilliant at the time, but it was only circumstances that I ended up with her. And I'm looking forward. I think that the word relationship is really important. You've got to be on the same page. You've got to feel the same about the novel and where it's going. And that is really important, finding the right agent.
I think that's such good advice, to really do your research and look at who else they represent is usually a really good trick, because like Sarah says, you know, you need someone who is kind of aligned with what you're writing. Liz, do you have anything to add?
So if somebody's asking, how do you find agents? And you can look in the Writers and Artists Yearbook, and that's like a big directory of all the different publishers and agencies, or you can look at the back of books that are quite similar to your project and see who that author is thanking in the acknowledgements. You don't always need an agent though. Some smaller presses or digital first publishing, sometimes you can send your manuscript directly to them. But as has already been said, an agent is a wonderful person when you click and you've got that great relationship and they're your champion and they know the editors, they know the industry, and they can kind of represent you in every way and do some tricky tasks for you. So when they're on your side, it feels wonderful. Thank you. And thank you to you all, because we've now come to the end of the roadshow. Honestly, it's been a pleasure. I hope everyone has got something out of this. Thank you to Liz, to Sarah, to Okechukwu, to Helen for being part of this. Thank you for Arvon for being our partner in the awards. And I'm hoping that a lot of you now will go and look at the Arvon website, and we'll go and look at the Northern Writers Awards website. My colleague has posted the links in. So yes, please do. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and good luck,
Thank
everybody.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you.
Do
Good
enter
luck.
the awards. Yeah, do it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.